Welcome to the Chamber Files. Every story you are about to hear is real, sent to us by real people who lived through something they cannot explain. If something happened to you, something you have never told anyone, send us your story. Your experience could be featured right here. This is the Chamber Files. And these are the stories that were never supposed to be told. Story 1. The one who should have stayed home. I want to tell you something that I still think about to this day. And the reason it sticks with me so much is not because it was some movie-style horror situation. It is because it was real life. It involved people I trusted, and it proved to me that you can look someone dead in the eye and have absolutely no idea what is going on behind those eyes. This was a few years back. My girlfriend at the time, I will call her Mara, and I were going through one of those rough stretches that comes with just trying to be a functioning adult. Bills, work, stress, all of it piling on at once. Mara suggested we rent a cabin for a few days, somewhere deep in the woods, just to reset. I was completely on board. The only problem was money. We did not have a lot of it. That is when she came up with a second idea. My closest friend, a guy I have known since middle school, I will call him Derek, was dating someone at the time. Mara figured if we invited them along to split the cost, it would turn into a fun couple's getaway, and we would actually be able to afford it. I called Derek that same day, and he was excited before I even finished explaining. We found a cabin that had everything we were looking for. Deep in the woods, a stone fireplace, the whole setup. Booked it for the end of the month. Then, less than a week before the trip, Derek's girlfriend ended things. It came out of nowhere, and by all accounts, it did not end well. Mara and I immediately felt terrible. We talked about whether we should just refund his half and let him off the hook entirely. We genuinely could not afford the full rental ourselves, but it also felt wrong to make him pay for a trip he was no longer going on. When I brought it up with Derek, he told me not to worry about it. He said to keep the money, go enjoy ourselves, and that he would be fine. I pushed back a few times, but he insisted. So Mara and I started getting pumped again. A couple's trip. Just the two of us. Cozy cabin in the winter woods. Then the very next day, Derek texted me and said he had found someone to take his ex's spot on the trip. I told him I was not sure about that. Mara agreed with me when I told her. We did not know anything about this woman. Travel with a stranger is awkward enough. But travel with someone's rebound, someone he had apparently known for all of 1 week, that felt like a recipe for disaster. Derek begged. He told us she was chill, that we would love her, that it would not be weird. And then he sweetened the deal by offering to cover my entire portion of the trip. That offer probably swayed me more than it should have. We said yes. We regretted it within about 20 minutes of being in the car together. Derek introduced his new girlfriend as Claire. She was quiet, not the shy kind of quiet, where you can tell the person just needs to warm up. More like a quiet that felt deliberate, like she was observing everyone around her. Mara and I tried to draw her out during the 2-hour drive. We asked about her job, where she grew up, what kind of music she liked. We got short answers or just a small smile. By the time we pulled up to the cabin, I honestly could not have told you what her voice sounded like. The first night started okay. We got settled, the fire was going, and we were all sitting around just unwinding. Mara suggested Uno. She always suggests Uno. It is her thing. Everyone agreed, and for a little while it actually felt like things might loosen up. Claire even seemed to relax a little. She was laughing at a couple of plays, starting to seem more human. Then, Mara called Uno, meaning she had 1 card left and everything shifted. Claire's face changed. The calm just vanished. Her voice, which had been so flat and quiet the entire trip, suddenly had real heat in it. She started accusing Mara of cheating. We laughed at first because it seemed like she must be joking around. But she was not. She got louder. She kept insisting there was no way Mara could have gotten down to 1 card without cheating, as if Uno has some kind of mathematical barrier to winning. Mara tried to defend herself, and that made it worse. Claire was practically screaming at someone she had met 6 hours earlier over a card game. She swiped all her cards off the table and walked out of the room. Derek apologized. Mara and I just looked at each other. We let it go. Dinner that night, Claire was completely fine. Normal. Smiling. She acted like the Uno incident had never happened, which was almost more unsettling than if she had still been upset. And then, the second thing happened. While we were eating, Claire started talking about her and Derek's personal life in a way that was deeply inappropriate for people who had just met. Private things. The kind of things you simply do not share at a dinner table with near strangers. Derek looked like he wanted to disappear. I kept cracking jokes and steering the conversation away, and eventually it stopped. But the mood was off. The four of us did not do much after dinner. Later that night, Mara shook me awake and told me to be quiet and listen. Through the walls of the cabin, coming from the other end of the hallway, we could hear two voices. The tone made it obvious. Derek and Claire were fighting. We decided to pretend we had not heard anything. We were not going to make Derek feel any worse than he already did. The next day passed without much incident. Derek was quiet and withdrawn. Claire kept mostly to herself. Mara and I filled the silence and tried to enjoy the cabin. That second night is when everything changed. I woke up sometime around 2 in the morning because there was someone standing in our room, right next to the bed. I jolted upright, and it took a second for my eyes to adjust before I realized it was Derek. He looked genuinely frightened in a way I had never seen from him before. Not dramatic scared, just quietly, deeply shaken. He asked if he could stay in our room. He asked if I would lock the door. I told him to sit down and explain. He said he had woken up in the middle of the night, and Claire was standing at the foot of the bed, completely still, just staring at him. When he asked what she was doing, she said she was watching him sleep. Just in case. He asked just in case of what. She did not answer. She turned around and walked out of the room. He waited a few minutes, then decided to get up and check on her. Before he left the room, he pulled back the blanket on her side of the bed. There was a knife there. A large kitchen knife, just sitting in the sheets. He left the room quietly and came through the dark living room toward us. He said Claire was in there. She was humming to herself, moving around slowly, almost swaying. He said it looked like sleepwalking, but felt different, felt intentional. He tried to get past her to reach our room, but the floor creaked under his foot, and she stopped. She turned toward him and said, in a calm, flat voice, "I see you." Then she turned back around and kept moving. He got into our room and locked the door. Mara was awake by now. The three of us sat there in the dark and just listened. We could still hear movement in the cabin, that low humming drifting down the hall. Then we heard the front door open and close. Derek went to the window and looked out. Claire was walking toward the tree line. T-shirt and shorts in the middle of winter. No jacket, no shoes. Just walking into the dark woods. He ran back to the bedroom and told us the knife was gone. Mara immediately said we needed to go get her. Whatever was happening, we could not let someone walk into freezing woods alone at night. Derek did not want to move. He was scared, and I did not blame him. Mara was already getting dressed. While we were standing there trying to decide, the front door opened again. We heard footsteps coming back down the hall. Slow, even steps. Still humming. She went back to the bedroom. We stayed in ours until 6 in the morning. When we finally came out, Claire was in the kitchen doing dishes. She turned around, smiled, and said good morning like it was the most normal thing in the world. Mara went to help her. I pulled Derek aside. He was pale. A few minutes later, he texted me to come to the bedroom immediately and not to say anything. When I got there, he was holding the edge of Claire's bag. He had bumped it while packing, and something had slid out. The same knife. It was tucked into the side pocket of her bag, ready to travel. We left the cabin within the hour. The drive home was long and quiet. Derek cut off contact with Claire as soon as we got back. She never tried to reach him. Not once. Mara spent a long time after that trying to find Claire online. No social media. No records anywhere. She even checked public inmate databases. Nothing. It is like the woman simply did not exist. which tells you everything you need to know. Whatever name she gave us was not real. And if the name was not real, then the question I still do not have an answer to is what exactly she was planning to do on that trip. I guess the only thing I know for sure is that for some reason, she decided not to do it. Story 2. The man at the door knew my name. There was a period in my life where I became deeply uncomfortable around other people. Not a passing phase. This was a full withdrawal that lasted about 2 years. My anxiety around social situations had gotten to a point where I would go out of my way, and I mean significantly out of my way, just to be completely alone. One of the things I started doing during this time was renting secluded cabins on weekends when I had the money for it. I would drive a couple hours out of the city, find somewhere with no neighbors, and just exist there. Hiking, reading, silence. It sounds extreme, I know. But when every casual interaction in your daily life feels like a drain, you will understand the appeal. This particular weekend was in the colder months. I found a place about 2 hours from home, arrived on a Friday evening, made a simple dinner, read for a while by the fire, and turned in early. A completely unremarkable start, exactly what I was there for. Saturday morning, I went out for a long hike. The trail wound through thick forest, and I had it entirely to myself, which was the point. About halfway through, something shifted. I started hearing sounds behind me. Branches snapping, the crunch of leaves, the kind of sounds that could easily be an animal, or the wind, or just the natural settling of a forest. But the rhythm of it felt deliberate, like it was following my pace. Every time I stopped walking and turned around, there was nothing there. Just trees. I would stand still for a moment, hear nothing, start walking again, and within 30 seconds the sounds would return. I told myself I was being irrational. I probably was. But the feeling would not leave, and eventually I just did not want to be out there anymore. I turned around and went back to the cabin earlier than planned. That evening was harder than usual. Something about the hike had left me unsettled, and when the anxiety gets hold of me, it tends to spiral. I had a couple of drinks to take the edge off, put on some music, started to feel more like myself. By around 10, I was in a decent enough headspace, just sitting there with the music on, not thinking about much. That is when I heard it. A knock at the front door. It was not a loud knock. It was careful, measured. I turned off the music and stood there, trying to decide if I had imagined it. Then it came again. The front door had 2 small rectangular windows set into the upper panel. I walked over and looked through them. The porch and the driveway were dark. Nothing there. I stepped back, and the knock came a third time. I looked again. This time, there was someone standing there. He was hard to make out in the dark, so I reached over and flipped the porch light on. And what I saw made even less sense than a stranger at my door at 11 at night in the middle of the woods. The man standing on my porch was dressed in a suit. Clean cut, sharp haircut, athletic build, clean shaven. He looked like he was heading to a business meeting. He did not look like someone who had been wandering through the woods. I kept the door locked and called through it, asking if he was okay and what he needed. There was a pause before he answered. A strange pause, longer than it should have been, like he was processing the question rather than just responding to it. Then he said he had been in a car with his girlfriend earlier, and something had happened. He said he had been walking through the woods for hours trying to find her, and now he was lost. He asked if he could please come inside to use a phone. On the surface, that was a story that made some kind of sense. But the delivery was all wrong. This man did not sound distressed. He did not sound tired, or scared, or relieved to have found a door to knock on. His voice was completely flat in a way that was hard to describe, like someone reading words from a card, rather than actually living them. There was no emotion in it at all. I told him to step back to the end of the driveway, and I would call someone for help. He paused again. Then he said he really needed to come inside, that something was outside, and if he did not get inside, he was going to be in trouble. I told him I was calling the police, and that he could either wait outside or leave, but the door was not opening. I turned away from the door to grab my phone, and, That is when I heard his voice again, lower this time, almost like he was speaking directly into the wood of the door. He said he needed to hide. He said he needed to get inside and hide. He said it twice. Then the knocking changed. He started pounding on the door, hard and fast, the whole frame shaking with it. I ran back and yelled at him to stop. I said I had already called the police. I said things I am not proud of, just to fill the silence. And then he laughed. It was the first fully human thing he had done since showing up on that porch. A real laugh, almost amused. I looked through the window, and his face was right there, pressed against the glass, inches from mine. I stumbled backward. When I steadied myself and looked again, he was just watching me with an expression I still cannot explain. Not exactly threatening, just not right. And then he said, "Come on, just open the door already." And he used my name. He said my actual name. I do not know how to describe what happens to your body in that moment when a stranger in the woods says your name through a locked door at 11 at night. I stood completely still for a few seconds. Then I picked up my phone and called 911. I told them exactly where I was and exactly what was happening. When I looked back at the door, the porch was empty. The officer arrived about 15 minutes later. I had not moved from where I was standing. I told him everything. He seemed genuinely confused. He said it was a quiet area, said he had not gotten any other calls that night, said he had never received a report like this before. He was kind. He could tell I was shaken, and he did not make me feel like I was imagining things. He suggested I drive into town and get a hotel room. I told him I had been drinking and did not feel safe driving. He offered to drive me himself. On the way to my car to grab my bag, the officer stopped walking. He made a sound like something had caught him off guard. I turned, and he was pointing at my tires. All 4 of them had been slashed. Someone had done it quietly, either while I was inside or while I was distracted at the door, or maybe both. The officer called it in, kept his voice steady, got me into the patrol car, and drove me to a hotel in town. He stayed with me in the lobby until I got hold of someone I trusted. I never went back to that area. I have thought about that night hundreds of times since. The suit, the flat voice, the pause before every answer, the laugh, the name. I have no explanation, and I never got one. What I do know is that someone slashed my tires. Someone was out in those woods while I was hiking, and those sounds I heard were not my imagination. And whoever that man was, he knew my name before I ever opened that door. Which means he knew me before he got there. Story 3. Someone had been living in the attic for over a year. About 6 months ago, my father died. I want to be upfront that this is not a grief story in the traditional sense. My father and I had a complicated relationship. He was not a cruel man. He just was not the kind of father I needed growing up, and I think somewhere inside he knew that, even if we never talked about it directly. We loved each other from a distance, with good intentions, but without ever quite getting there. When the estate was settled, I found out he had left me his cabin. He owned a small place in the woods a few hours from the city. I had been there as a kid a handful of times and had not thought about it in years. My friends immediately said it was his version of a final joke. But I do not think that was it. I think he knew I would sell it, and he wanted me to. He was trying to leave me something useful. The catch was that to sell it properly, I needed to go out, clean it up, fix anything that needed work, and make it presentable. So I decided to go. I told myself it was practical. But honestly, some part of me wanted one last look at a place where my father had spent so much of his time. My version of saying goodbye. I drove out on a Thursday evening, and the first thing I noticed when I walked through the door was the smell. It hit me immediately. Thick and sour and wrong. Not rotting food exactly. Something more like mildew and sweat, and something organic that had been sitting far too long in an enclosed space. My father had not been to the cabin in close to a year before he passed, so I assumed it had just gotten damp and stale. I did a quick walkthrough looking for dead animals or a broken pipe. Nothing obvious. The second thing I noticed was that the cabin looked exactly how I remembered it from when I was 10 years old. Same furniture, same shelves, Same layout. It was like stepping into a photograph. My father was not someone who replaced things. I spent several hours doing a thorough clean of the downstairs. Wiped everything down, took out bags of trash, got the place smelling at least livable. I had a checklist, and I worked through it methodically. While I was cleaning, I kept hearing sounds above me. A faint shifting, like weight moving across a surface. I told myself it was the rafters settling, or an animal that had gotten in through a vent. I knew the cabin had a sort of hybrid space above the back hallway. Not quite an attic, not quite a crawl space. Something in between. There was a pull cord in the ceiling back there that released a folding ladder. I figured I would deal with whatever was up there in the morning. I made something to eat, read for a while, and went to bed in my father's old room. I fell asleep thinking about him, about this place, about all the weekends he spent out here alone that I never thought to ask him about. I woke up around 2 in the morning to the sound of movement. It was coming from directly above my head, not the subtle creak of a settling house, actual movement, something shifting weight, something repositioning itself. My first thought was raccoons or squirrels, but the sounds had too much deliberateness to them, too much consistency. I decided I was not going to get back to sleep anyway, so I got up, grabbed my phone for the flashlight, and walked down the back hallway toward the pull cord. The attic door was already open. The ladder was hanging down. I was certain I had not opened it when I arrived. I had walked past that hallway a dozen times during cleaning, and I would have noticed a ladder hanging from the ceiling. I told myself maybe the latch was old and had given way on its own. I stood there with my flashlight and told myself that. Then I noticed something on the floor at the base of the ladder. A snack wrapper. A fresh one. Not a dusty old thing from years ago. The crinkle of it was still clean. I picked it up and stood there holding it for a long moment. Then I threw it away, got a glass of water, and went and sat on the couch in the living room. I turned on the small lamp on the end table beside the couch. It gave off a low amber glow, just enough to keep me out of total darkness. I sat there and thought about my father. I thought about the wrapper. I tried to make it mean something simple. Then I looked across the room toward the corner beside the old recliner. There was a lump on the floor near the base of the chair, covered by a blanket. I had cleaned this entire room that afternoon. I had moved the furniture. I did not remember leaving a blanket there, let alone whatever was underneath it. I stood up slowly and took a few steps toward it. Then, I stopped. At the edge of the blanket, poking out from underneath the hem, there was a boot. I took one step back, and then the blanket moved. Not slipping, not settling. It moved the way something moves when the thing underneath it changes position. I could see it now that I was looking. The rise and fall of breathing. There was a person under that blanket, a full-grown adult, lying on the floor of my father's living room, 3 feet from where I had been sitting. I backed into the kitchen without making a sound. I grabbed my phone and my keys off the counter. And then, I walked as fast as I could to the front door and got out of that cabin. I ran to my car and reversed down the long driveway without turning on the headlights until I hit the main road. In my rearview mirror, I saw the front door open. A man came out onto the porch and stood there, watching my car pull away. He was gaunt and unkempt, with the look of someone who had been living rough for a very long time. He did not chase after me. He just stood there. I called the local police department and reported what had happened. They arrived within 20 minutes. By then, he was gone. The officer who handled the call told me that based on the condition of the attic, the amount of trash up there, the arrangement of old blankets and belongings, this man had almost certainly been living in that space for over a year. He had probably moved in sometime after my father stopped visiting regularly. When nobody came to the cabin for months at a stretch, he had no reason to leave. They never identified him. He was gone before anyone could find him, and as far as I know, they never located him after that either. I never took another step inside that cabin. I hired a company to clear everything out and sold the property as is a few weeks later. The officer said the man was probably not dangerous, that if he had wanted to do something, he had had countless opportunities while I was sleeping just below him. That is supposed to be reassuring. And in a rational sense, maybe it is. But I think about the night I fell asleep in that cabin thinking about my father. And I think about how directly overhead, just a few feet above me, there was a stranger lying in the dark, listening to me move around in the rooms below. For more than a year, he had been up there. He knew the sounds of that cabin better than I did. He had been living in it while my father was dying, while the paperwork was being sorted, while I was driving out there to say goodbye. That is not something I have been able to make peace with. I am not sure I ever will. Welcome to the Chamber Files. Every story you are about to hear is real. These accounts were sent to us directly by real people who lived through something they cannot explain and needed someone to hear it. If something has happened to you, send us your story at thechamberfiles@gmail.com. Your experience could be the next one told right here. Tonight, we have 4 accounts from people who worked the night shift and lived to tell about it. These are their words. Story 1, I was 21 when this happened. It was 2017, and at the time I was working part-time at a gas station a few towns over from where I lived. It was one of those jobs I only planned to keep for a few months, just until I figured out what I wanted to do next. The shifts were usually easy, a lot of ringing up snacks and cigarettes and paying for gas. During the day it was annoying but normal. The nights were different. The nights dragged. The place felt too bright inside and too dark outside, and every customer felt a little stranger than the last. That night I was working the closing shift by myself, and I still think about it all the time. The store closed at midnight. Around 9 or 10 at night, the phone started ringing. I answered without thinking anything of it. The second I picked up, I heard this weird voice. It was low and drawn out, like someone trying to sound like a killer in a horror movie. It sounded really forced, like someone doing an impression, but it was still unsettling. The voice asked if I was all alone in the store. I just stayed quiet for a second, then said something sarcastic like, "Yeah, you got me." And then I hung up. I figured it was one of my friends messing with me. I texted the group chat and asked which one of them was calling the store pretending to be a serial killer. They all found it funny and acted confused. One said he was at home. Another said the same. I assumed they were just keeping the bit going. About 10 minutes later, the phone rang again. That same fake horror movie voice. This time, it asked why I hung up. I said once again, "All right, you got me." The voice let out this soft laugh that sounded weirdly real, not playful the way I expected. Then it said, "I should not be rude to people who know where I am." I hung up again, but this time I felt a little off. It was probably still a joke, but there was something about how calm the person sounded that got to me. Customers kept coming in, enough to keep me distracted. People getting gas, buying beer, getting lottery tickets. But every time things slowed down, I found myself staring at the phone. It rang a third time, around 10:40. I answered and immediately regretted it. The voice asked if the store always got this quiet that late. That got under my skin more than I wanted to admit. I said nothing and hung up. I started messaging my friends one by one. One was with his girlfriend. One sent me a picture from his basement. One was at a friend's house almost half an hour away. Even though the caller had never said my name, he was describing exactly what was happening in the store. Around 11, the calls started coming closer together. I stopped answering after the 5th one. The phone would ring, and I would just stare at it. Then, a minute or two later, it would ring again. That went on for about 15 minutes. I started checking the outside cameras more. The store sat by itself off a road that got pretty dead at night. There was a small patch of woods behind one side of the building, and an alley area near the dumpster. The cameras had blind spots, and the picture at night was grainy. I kept flipping through them, half expecting to catch one of my friends crouched outside laughing. I did not see anyone, though. Then I started hearing sounds outside. A tap somewhere. What sounded like a light scrape near the sidewall. Then a noise near the back that sounded like someone stepping on loose gravel. I texted the group chat again and told them to seriously stop. One of my friends actually called me from his normal number and said he genuinely was not involved. He told me to lock the door early if I had to. At around 11:40, one last customer came in. I remember the exact sound of the door because it made me jump. I looked up and saw what seemed like a regular guy at first, maybe late 20s or early 30s. Nothing outwardly crazy about him. He was not dirty or dressed strangely. He just had this blank expression. He did not say hello. He just walked in and started moving through the aisles. I watched him on the camera while pretending not to. He took way too long for someone who ended up buying one bag of chips. He kept stopping in different aisles. More than once, I saw the top half of his face appear above the shelves as he looked toward the counter. Not in a casual way, it felt like he was checking on me. My stomach had that heavy feeling, like my body already knew something was wrong before my brain wanted to admit it. He was in there for at least 8 or 9 minutes. Then he finally came up to the counter with his chips. He still did not say a word. So, I did not either. I just scanned them. When I looked down at the register, everything felt normal for 1 second. Then I looked up and caught him staring directly into my eyes. He held it for maybe 2 seconds. There was no expression on his face. Then he looked down and paid. I handed him back the bag, and he turned toward the door. Right as he pushed it halfway open, he stopped. He turned his head back toward me without fully turning his body. His chin was slightly lowered, so his eyes had to look up at me. Then he smiled. I still do not know how to explain that smile without sounding dramatic. It looked like he knew exactly how creepy he looked, and he was doing it on purpose. Every hair on my body stood up. He stepped outside, and instead of walking toward the pumps or toward a car, he walked around the side of the building. He kept his eyes on me through the glass the entire time. He kept that smile too. I stood there watching him until the angle cut him off. Then I rushed to the camera monitor and followed him there. I saw him head toward the side where the woods were. Then he disappeared into the blind spot behind the building. He did not come back out. I waited 10 seconds, then 20, then a full minute. He never reappeared. That was enough. I locked the door early. I texted my family and my friends and told them there was a creepy guy outside and I was not joking. I said if I stopped replying, something probably happened to me. I rushed through closing as fast as I could. Barely cleaned anything. Kept checking the cameras over and over. Nothing. When midnight hit, I decided I could not stay anymore. I grabbed my stuff, turned off what I needed to, and went to the front door. Relocking it from outside was the most tense 20 seconds of my life. Once I did, I took off running to my car. I got most of the way there, and just as I slowed down for half a second, I heard fast footsteps. Not running, but worse, somehow, like speed walking, slapping the pavement from the front corner of the building. I turned and saw him. He was moving toward me and my car fast. I yanked the door open, threw myself inside, locked it, and started the engine. I hit reverse and peeled out of that lot. I looked once in the mirror and saw him standing there in the lights, watching me leave. The next day I texted my boss and told him I was done working overnights. He looked at the footage and said the guy looked like a regular customer to him. He said maybe I had gotten spooked from the calls and connected things that were not connected. That made me furious. I was the one there. I was the one getting the calls. I was the one who saw him disappear around the building and come walking toward me in the dark when I tried to leave. I quit right after that. To this day, I believe the caller and that man were the same person. I cannot prove it. But I know what I felt that night, and I know what I saw. If that story made you want to hear more, subscribe to the Chamber Files right now. Every week, we bring you new accounts from real people, real events, real fear. Hit that subscribe button so you never miss one. Story 2. My name is Cadence. I work the closing shift at a small dive bar in the quieter part of my town. The place is right off the highway, but the parking lot has a back entrance open to the general public. It is nothing fancy, just a dimly lit spot where the regulars know each other by name, and the jukebox has been playing the same rotation of classic rock for years. Most of our customers are locals, truckers passing through, and the occasional lost tourist. The tips are surprisingly decent. I have learned how to handle the usual crowd: the talkers, the flirters, the quiet drinkers, and the ones who just want to be left alone. During the week, I work my night shifts alone. No bar back, no extra staff. It is obviously slower work, but I miss having company. I tend to be vigilant on those nights because we do get the occasional bar fight. That is why I clocked this particular man immediately. It was sometime after 1 a.m. on a Tuesday when he walked in. If I had to guess, he was in his late 40s. But he was extremely clean-cut and well-groomed. Not the kind of look you would expect in a place like this. He was wearing a black turtleneck underneath a black trench coat, well-dressed but casual about it. He had this air of sophistication, like someone with real money, not the loud kind. He glanced around slowly before walking to the bar and sitting down. When I walked over, he ordered something top shelf without hesitation. As I poured, he asked if I liked working here. A normal enough question, so I answered honestly. I told him yeah and smiled back. He chatted with me for a bit, which I did not mind. The bar was quiet. Then, out of nowhere, he asked if I had ever thought about doing something bigger. That was a slightly strange question, but I gave him my standard smile and said I was happy for now. He nodded and sipped his drink, seemingly disappointed for a reason I did not understand. After a pause, he asked me what time I got off. I gave a vague answer, trying to brush him off in a friendly way. He smiled like he already knew something, then drained his drink, pulled out a crisp $100 bill, laid it gently on the bar like it was nothing, and walked out without another word. I did not know what to make of it. I figured I was never going to see him again. I was wrong. About a week later, he came back. This time he was not alone. There was a woman with him. She looked like she was in her mid-30s and was dressed in a way that did not quite match her age. Trendy but slightly off, like someone trying too hard to blend in with a younger crowd. Everything about her seemed calculated, from the way she smiled too easily to the way she leaned against the bar like we were already friends. Before I could even say hello, the very first thing she said to me was a compliment. She put on an overly joyful smile and said, "You are so pretty." Her fingers brushed my arm as she said it, lingering just a second longer than felt normal. I thanked her, but I could instantly tell something was off about this woman. The man did not speak, which struck me as strange given how talkative he had been before. They ordered drinks. Then the questions started flooding in. She asked how long I had been working here, how old I was, the usual small talk. But I could tell it was not small talk. She was studying me. At one point she looked over at the man, and it seemed like they were communicating without speaking. Then she leaned in and lowered her voice. She told me she ran an exclusive events club and was always looking for young, fun people for private parties. She said I would make a killing, $10,000 for a weekend. I let out a small, forced laugh and said it sounded too good to be true. She insisted it was real. Her smile never faltered. Then, casually, she said I should step outside for a second because there was someone who could explain it better. My pulse kicked up. I was not playing along anymore. I said I was good, firmly, with no smile. Just then, a group of loud customers walked in. The woman's friendly mask slipped just slightly before she and the man left without another word. I told my coworkers and my boss what happened. We all agreed to keep an eye out. My boss said he was a 15-minute drive away if I ever needed him, and that the security cameras would deter any trouble. There was not much more I could do. Those people had not technically done anything illegal. I tried to push it out of my head. But a few nights later, after closing, I saw the car. It was parked across the street, engine off, just sitting there. I told myself it was nothing, but the feeling of being watched crawled over my skin. As I walked to my car, I kept my keys clutched tight in my hand. When I pulled out of the lot, I checked my mirrors. The car followed. It stayed just far enough back to seem casual, but every turn I made, it was still there. I took a random turn onto a side street. Still there. I forced myself to stay calm and think. Then, without hesitating, I pulled into the parking lot of a police station. The second I did, the car sped off. Things were quiet for a while after that. But I knew it was not over. It was a slow weekday shift. By midnight, I was wiping down the counter and thinking about closing early. The door creaked open, and it was the woman. I sent my boss a text as quietly as I could. When I looked back up, she was staring at me with that same artificial smile. She walked to the bar and sat down with her hands folded neatly. I told her we were about to close, and she needed to leave. She made a pouty face and asked for just one old-fashioned. I figured pouring it would stall her long enough for my boss to arrive, so I turned around and started making it. Then, I heard it. The soft, unmistakable click of the front door shutting. I whipped around. She was gone. Through the glass, I saw it. A black van idling just outside. I ran to the front door and locked it as fast as I could. That is when I heard it from the back. Metal rattling. Someone was trying to get in through the back door. I grabbed the heaviest thing nearby and clutched it as I dialed 911. There was no way the police would get there in time. I was bracing myself for whatever was coming when headlights suddenly flooded the lot. It was my boss. The noise at the back door stopped. A few seconds later, the van peeled out. My boss had caught the license plate as it left. When the officers arrived and reviewed the footage, they found something I had not known. Just before the woman left, the cameras had caught two masked figures crouching near the front door, waiting. There was another person at the back trying to flush me out to the front. The plate number turned out to be unregistered. No leads, no arrests. My boss does not make me work alone anymore, but I still think about one thing every single night I go in. I still cannot figure out how they knew when I would be working alone. Story 3. I used to work the night shift at a gas station, off a quiet stretch of highway. I say used to, because after what happened a few months ago, I will not work a night shift again. It was just past 2:30 in the morning. I stepped outside for some air. The parking lot was empty. Just the pumps, the road, and a dark stretch of trees beyond. The neon sign flickered faintly, and it was hazy out. Even with the highway not too far off, it was silent. Right as I was about to walk back inside, I noticed something move at the edge of my vision. There was a person standing behind one of the pumps. He was wearing a dark red hoodie, hood up, both hands in his pockets. There was not a car in sight. He was not heading toward the store either. He was just standing there, half turned in my direction, watching me. I went inside but kept an eye on him through the glass. After a few minutes, he started walking toward the door. Slowly at first, then pushing through like he had made up his mind all at once. He walked up to the counter and did not say anything, just stared at me like he was sizing me up. Then, in a rushed and almost rehearsed way, he said his car had broken down just before the pumps. He needed a jump or some gas to get to the next town. I offered to call a tow truck. No, he said quickly, shaking his head. He just needed a flashlight. Maybe some help under the hood. The way he watched my reaction felt like a test. I asked where his car was, and he pointed at the monitor behind me. I turned, and to my surprise, there actually was a car parked out there. I almost believed him. But then it hit me. I had just been outside. I would have noticed a car out there. I glanced back at the monitor and saw the slightest movement near the back bumper. Someone was crouching just out of view. A cold wave hit me. I forced a calm smile and said I would help him, but needed to grab my phone from the back office first. I turned slowly, so I would not spook him. The second I was out of his direct sight, I slammed my hand down on the emergency panic button under the counter. The alarm screeched through the store. I expected him to panic. Instead, something shifted. The nervous energy disappeared. His whole body language changed. He actually relaxed. And then he smiled. Not a panic smile, not an embarrassed one. A slow, knowing grin, like this was entertaining to him. Then he turned and walked out in one smooth motion. I ran to the monitor just in time to see both of them sprint into the woods behind the station. Not toward the car. Into the woods. The car just sat there, engine off, headlights off, no one inside. By the time police arrived, the men were gone. No footprints leading anywhere, no sign of them. Then one of the officers pointed out something I had missed. The front passenger door of the car was hanging open. There had been a third person inside the whole time. The car had been reported stolen nearly a week earlier, over 100 miles away. No one came forward. No other crimes were linked to it. Just an abandoned car in the middle of nowhere with no explanation. That was months ago. I am still waiting for answers. And I will never work a night shift again. Story for this happened a couple of weeks ago. I worked the night shift at a large retail store. After a while, it starts to feel like you are just floating through time. The nights blend together. Same shelves, same routine, same dull hum of the overhead lights. I mostly stock the electronics section because it is quieter than the other areas. People do not exactly rush in at 2 in the morning to buy phone chargers. Most customers are night owls or truckers grabbing supplies. That is why I noticed him. At first, I did not think much of it. Just another guy wandering the aisles. But after a few minutes, I realized he was not shopping. He was not even pretending to browse. He just kept appearing. Every time I glanced up, he was nearby, hovering in the next aisle over, standing too still near the clearance section. He was not looking at anything. He was watching me. I went to radio someone, but the battery in my radio was dead. Eventually, I was debating whether to find a manager when I felt a hand wrapped firmly around my arm. I nearly jumped out of my skin. But before I could react, a woman's voice rang out, loud and overly friendly. "There you are," she said, like she had been looking for me for hours. I turned and saw a woman I had never seen before in my life, smiling, her grip firm on my arm, like we were old friends reuniting. Before I could speak, she leaned in and dropped her voice low. "That guy has been recording you," she whispered. "Follow me." My stomach dropped. I glanced back, and the man was no longer pretending to browse. He was staring right at me. I let her pull me forward without questioning it. The way she acted so casual and loud, like we genuinely knew each other, I was grateful someone had noticed and stepped in. She kept up the act as we walked, chatting about nothing while steering me through the aisles. I started expecting her to drop the pretense, but she kept going. At some point, I looked behind us, and the man was no longer following. I told her we were fine now, and that we should find my manager. She squeezed my arm tighter and said he was still somewhere in the store. I told her it was fine and planted my feet, twisting slightly to loosen her grip. "You can let go now," I said. But she did not. She smiled and said, "Come on, just a little further." I looked around. The store was nearly empty. We had passed the registers, past the self-checkout, moved past the busiest aisles. The warehouse section was ahead, dimly lit and silent. Beyond that was the side exit, the one without cameras, the one used for loading shipments. That is when it clicked. I screamed for help and yanked my arm free with everything I had. She lost her grip just enough for me to pull away. I did not stop. I ran toward the front of the store. As I did, she called out behind me, telling me to come back. Then she said my name. My actual name. A name I had never given her. I found a coworker running toward me and told him to call security. By the time I had explained everything, that woman and that man were gone. When security reviewed the footage, they confirmed what I had suspected. The man and the woman had entered together. His face was clearly captured on camera. Hers was always turned away. The police classified it as a failed abduction attempt. That man should be easy to identify from the footage. I am still waiting for an update. What terrifies me most is not the attempt itself. It is that they knew my name. Those people had not picked me at random. I was a specific target, and I do not know why. That is all 4 stories for tonight. If something like this has happened to you, we want to hear it. Send your story to thechamberfiles@gmail.com. The stories that keep us up at night are the ones we bring to you, and yours could be next inside the Chamber Files. And before you go, if these stories stayed with you, make sure you are subscribed. New stories drop every week, and you do not want to miss what is coming. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an episode of The Chamber Files. We will see you in the next one. Welcome to The Chamber Files. What you are about to hear are real accounts submitted to us by real people. These are experiences that stayed with them long after they were over. Experiences they needed someone else to hear. If something has happened to you out there in the dark, we want to know about it. Send your story to thechamberfiles@gmail.com. You could be the next voice inside the Chamber Files. Tonight, we have 3 accounts. 3 people. 3 moments of being completely alone somewhere they never expected to encounter something that terrified them. These are their words. Story 1. The woman on the empty road I had driven across the country for my brother's wedding and was making the long trip back to the West Coast. A drive like that takes the better part of 5 days, and I kept it moving by pushing as far as I could each day before stopping for the night. By the 4th day, I was deep into the routine. I would drive until my body told me to stop, then pull into whatever motel came first. It was around 10 in the evening when I hit a stretch of road that felt like the edge of the world. No other vehicles in either direction. No gas stations, no roadside diners, no lit signs of any kind. Just dark asphalt cutting through flat, empty land. My phone had dropped signal entirely. The only reason I was not more anxious about it was because I had 2 energy drinks in me and felt wide awake despite the hour. I had been going for about 30 minutes without seeing a single other car when she appeared in my headlights. There was a woman on the shoulder of the road, waving both arms above her head like she was signaling for her life. She was hunched forward, her clothes dirty and thrown around like she had been out there for a long time. She looked hurt. She came up in my lights so fast that I was already past her before I could fully process what I had seen. I kept driving for a bit, watching her disappear in the rearview. The longer I drove, the worse I felt about it. Out here, miles from anything, no signal, no help. If she was actually injured and I had driven past her, that was not something I was going to be able to let go of. I want to be clear that I would not have turned around for just anyone on a road like that at night. But she appeared to be hurt, and something about that changed the calculation for me. I told myself that if I pulled up and anything felt wrong at all, I would leave immediately and contact the police the moment I had service. I turned around and drove back. When I reached the spot where I had seen her, she was no longer at the roadside. She had moved down toward the tree line at the edge of the road, but she was still there, still waving, still looking distressed. I passed her again, made a U-turn, and came to a stop right in front of where she had been standing. She was gone. I sat in the car for a full minute. Nothing. No movement, no sign of her. I made the mistake of getting out. I walked around to the shoulder and stood there in the dark. The road behind me was completely silent. Outside the reach of my headlights, the dark was absolute. I moved a few feet toward the tree line and stood there letting my eyes adjust. And then something moved in the trees ahead of me. A shape shifted in the dark, deep in the woods, much further from the road than I expected. As my eyes focused on it, I realized it was her. She was standing in there, quite far back, and she had both arms raised again, waving slowly in my direction. Faintly, I could hear her voice. It was barely there, strained and hollow, like she had been out there for days without water. I took a few steps in. I know how that sounds now. But in the moment, I genuinely believed she was real and in danger. It was only after I had walked much too far into those trees that my brain caught up with my feet and told me what should have been obvious from the moment I got out of the car. Whatever this was, it was designed to pull me away from the road and away from my vehicle. I was being led somewhere. I stopped. The instant I stopped, she stopped too. The waving ended mid-motion, her voice cut off completely, not trailing off the way an exhausted person's voice does, just instantly gone. Like a switch. I stood still and looked at her. Now that neither of us was moving, I started to notice things I had not registered before. She was very tall. Not unusually so on its own, but combined with something else I could not quite name, her proportions seemed wrong in a way I could not place. The way she was standing did not sit right with me. Then she moved. Just one step in my direction, and her head tilted slightly to the side. It was enough to shift her face out of the shadow. I do not think it was a woman. What I saw in that brief moment looking back at me from the dark was a face that had nothing soft about it. Heavy features. A jaw that did not match the shape of the body I had been following. Whatever it was wearing the idea of a woman the way someone wears a costume. My body moved before I made a conscious decision. I turned and ran hard through the trees, back to the road, and got in my car. Behind me I heard that faint, hollow voice calling out again. I drove through the rest of the night without stopping. Whatever I found in those headlights, I am certain I was never meant to drive away from it. If that account is already under your skin, you are in the right place. Subscribe to the Chamber Files right now. Every single week we bring you new accounts from real people who lived through something they cannot explain. Hit that subscribe button so the next story finds you the moment it drops. Story 2. The two men in the shelter. I was on a solo hunting trip, using a small public wood shelter deep in the backcountry as a base between excursions. The shelter had nothing inside it but 2 bunk beds and a single window. No electricity, no running water. Just 4 walls and a roof to sleep under between nights in the field. I had brought all my own gear for when I was camped out, but the shelter gave me somewhere slightly more secure to recover. After my first 2 nights in the field, I came back to the shelter to rest before heading out again. When I walked in, I knew immediately that someone had been there while I was gone. A few of my things had been moved, not taken, just shifted slightly, as if someone had come in, looked around, and left. Since it was a public shelter, that was not impossible. But given how remote this place was, and how unused it had appeared when I arrived, it was a notable coincidence. I set it aside and made lunch, rested through the afternoon, and started repacking my gear as the sun went down. Then, I got into bed. Hours passed. I was still awake when I heard them outside. 2 men, talking back and forth as they came up the path. Their voices got louder over the course of about 20 seconds, and then the door opened, and they walked in. Even though I had a moment to prepare myself, it still startled me to see them. What surprised me more was that it did not startle them at all. One of them nodded as he came through the door. Neither of them said anything. I said, "Hey." They did not respond. They set their gear down by the other bunk and sat down in total silence. Something about them felt wrong immediately. It was not one specific thing. It was just the overall feel of the room with them in it. The silence that was not the comfortable kind. The way neither of them looked at me, but also did not seem to be avoiding looking at me. The shelter was small enough that the 3 of us were essentially on top of each other, and yet they acted as if I was not there. I considered leaving. I had thought about grabbing my bag and finding a spot in the trees a mile or 2 out, but I talked myself out of it. These men had hiked a long way in the dark to get here. Maybe they were just exhausted, and not in the mood for conversation. Leaving in the middle of the night would mean navigating unfamiliar terrain in the dark, and if I had read this wrong, I would look like the strange one. I got back into my bunk. One of the men climbed to the upper bed, the other took the lower across from me. I laid still and stared at the ceiling, willing myself to fall asleep. After about 10 minutes, I turned my head to look at the other bunk. The man on the bottom was staring directly at me, not glancing, not just awake and looking around. He was looking at me with no expression, no movement, like he had been fixed on me the entire time. I thought we were both lying there in the dark. I moved my eyes back to the ceiling. Every part of me wanted to get up and leave, but I stayed. I told myself it was nothing. I laid there for a long time telling myself that, until at some point it became quiet enough and still enough that I drifted off. I do not know what time it was when I woke up. My eyes opened to complete darkness. It took a few seconds to remember where I was, and then I remembered the men. I turned over and looked at their bunk. Both of them were standing in the middle of the room, not sitting on the edge of the mattress, not walking to the door. Standing, perfectly upright in the center of the shelter, looking at me in the dark, without a word. I did not think. I grabbed my bag and my rifle, and I went through the door. I ran on adrenaline for what I think was close to 4 miles, before I found a spot I felt safe enough to sit down. I did not put up a tent. I sat against a tree with my back covered and waited for the sky to get light. Then I walked out of those woods and did not go back. I still do not know what those men wanted, but I know what I felt when I saw them standing there in the dark, staring at me in complete silence. And I know that if I had not woken up when I did, I am not sure I would have woken up at all. Story 3. The campsite that did not exist. A couple of times a year, I load a slide and truck camper onto my truck and disappear for a few weeks. I live in the Northwest, and there is no shortage of public land out here. So most nights I am sleeping somewhere free, and usually alone. I prefer it that way. The crowded campgrounds with generators running and dogs barking were never my thing. On the night this happened, I had found a spot in the forest of East Idaho, up high and tucked away. I only found it because the first few places I checked were full. This one I came across almost by accident, and since I arrived after dark, I did not bother driving further down the trail to see what else was out there. The first pullout was empty, and that was good enough for me. I parked, extended the camper, set up my chairs and my table outside, and got a fire going. The camper was not the kind you could comfortably spend hours inside during the day. It was functional for sleeping, but cramped for anything else, so I spent most of my time outside. That night was the same. I was maybe an hour into sitting by the fire when I heard footsteps coming through the dark from the trail ahead. A man walked up out of nowhere and came right into the edge of my firelight. He waved and asked how my evening was. He looked like the kind of person you would expect to see out here. Mid-30s, worn brown jacket, the casual look of someone who spends a lot of time outdoors. We talked for a while. I even handed him one of my beers. He never clearly said why he had come over, but I assumed he was camped somewhere down the trail and had seen my fire and come to say hello. After maybe half an hour, he said goodnight and walked back the way he came. In the morning, I woke up early and walked down the trail to stretch my legs and take a look at the rest of the area. The trail ended maybe a minute past my campsite. There was a small turnaround area where a few trucks had clearly spun around before, and after that it was dense, unbroken forest. No other pullouts, no other campsites, no tire tracks that went any further. I walked back the other way too, toward the entrance, and checked every possible spot. There was nothing. My site was the only one. I went back to camp and made coffee and sat with it, turning over the same question. The man had said he was parked nearby with a small truck camper similar to mine. So where exactly had he come from, and where had he gone? I spent most of the day out there, telling myself there had to be a simple explanation. Maybe he left in the night and drove out before sunrise. Maybe I had missed something when I walked the trail. I let it settle into the background and enjoyed the afternoon. By the time the sun went down and the fire was going again, I had mostly stopped thinking about it. Then I heard footsteps in the dark again. The same man came walking out of the trees and sat down across from me at the fire, without much of a preamble. He asked how my night was going, the same greeting as before. I answered and waited a moment, then casually brought it up. I told him I had walked the trail that morning and had not seen any other campsite or any truck, that I had looked pretty carefully. His expression shifted, not dramatically, just a small change. The ease he had carried the night before went somewhere. He said that was strange, in a tone that was flat and almost too calm for the words. A few seconds of quiet passed between us where neither of us spoke, and I could feel both of us trying to read the other. Then he asked me what else I had seen out there. The way he said it scared me in a way I was not expecting. There was something underneath the question, like there was a specific answer he was hoping I did not have. I told him I had not seen anything, that it was hazy, and I had not gone far. He held eye contact without blinking for longer than felt normal, then said that I was welcome to come see the campsite for myself if it would put my mind at ease. He stood up and took a few steps away from the fire, gesturing for me to follow. I said I was fine, and that I would take his word for it. He pushed a little, said he could tell I was uneasy, and that seeing the spot for himself would clear things up. I stayed in my chair and said no again. That bothered him. He did not do anything obvious, but it bothered him. He nodded slowly after a moment, looked at the ground, then turned and walked back into the dark without saying anything else. I did not wait to think it over. I started throwing everything into the camper as fast as I could. I did not fold anything up or pack it properly. I just moved. When I got in the truck and started pulling out, my headlights swung across the edge of the trees. He was still there, standing at the edge of the dark, watching me go. He was holding something. I could not tell you what it was. I only looked for a second before the headlights moved off him. Then I was on the road, and I did not stop until I was somewhere with other people around. I have replayed that trip many times since then. I do not know who he was or what he was doing out there. But he knew there was no campsite on that trail. He had to, and he knew exactly what he wanted me to walk toward when he stood up and asked me to follow him. If you are subscribed to the Chamber Files, you already know what it feels like to hear something you cannot quite shake afterward. If you are not yet subscribed, now is the time. These accounts come in every week from real people who need someone to hear what happened to them. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a single one. New stories drop every week right here on the Chamber Files. And if something like this has happened to you, send it to us. The address is thechamberfiles@gmail.com. Whatever you experienced in the dark, we want to hear it. We will see you in the next one.